much. My name is Dr. Cailyn Green. I have the fabulous team here of Dr. Bernadette DeYoung, Shannon Pritting, and Jennifer Collins. And we are presenting today on our social justice OER from writing to online modulars. I'm going to Bernie start us off here.
Yeah, so I'm just going to give a little history of our project. We started out as a work group developing a new class to meet the new SUNY general education requirement in diversity. So we were trying to figure out kind of how we could develop something that would meet that, as well as maybe enhance some of the offerings that we had in our department, and started working on a course. And we split out into a couple different groups, and Cailyn and I ended up working together on finding materials. And finding materials turned out to be an interesting challenge. We didn't find anything that we particularly liked or that was particularly current. One of the experiences I've really had teaching social justice is oftentimes my students are sometimes even more ahead of me in their knowledge base. And I was concerned about aging materials and what that looked like, and started talking about what we could kind of supplement with and how we could create supplemental materials. And that started out as a conversation about putting OER style content into the learning management system, right? So we're using Brightspace, and we were thinking it would be, chunks of knowledge and information in the sections so we have a place to write things out. And it snowballed into a lot more than that. Like, we started to do a little bit more digging and started to do a little bit more work, and ended up finding ourselves in a spot where we decided that probably the best bet would be to generate something that looked more like a textbook than necessarily just creating content in the LMS. And that's kind of where we started with all this. We really liked the idea of doing something open educational resource because it really fit into, well, the topic at hand, social justice, equity, some of those things. And many of us in the work group felt pretty strongly that that's important for students that we're working with. So it fit into our perspectives of equity pretty well. And so we started talking about what it would look like. And that was an interesting process as well. It overlaps a little bit with some of what Cailyn's going to talk about in terms of timeline. But we started to figure out, what do we actually need in this book? Like, what would the content actually look like? And I was very adamant it needed to be current content. We need to be talking about current events. We need to be able to figure out a way to maintain some of that, to keep it current as things happen in our world. And so we started to kind of chunk things together and figure out sections. Interestingly, once again, there was a lot of snowballing there, right? Things got changed and shifted throughout the writing process, throughout the process of creating the book. I literally split a chapter in half like a month ago and said, we need to cut this a little bit to kind of figure out what we were going to put in terms of content. It was a tough thing to really narrow down. And I think I developed, and I'm assuming Cailyn will say the same thing, a real understanding for maybe why there wasn't current content, and why, how hard it can be to organize and figure out what that content is. So we started working on that and found ourselves maybe a little bit overwhelmed by some of it, and started bringing on some other authors. So at this point, I believe there's 6 of us that are listed on the book, and brought in some co-authors and did some work with them, split out some of the content materials, started breaking things into chapters, and brought in someone to do some peer reviewing, an initial peer review, as well as some editing, including APA editing, just to help us out a little bit. And then brought in second peer reviewers who were experts in the field and able to provide really good content, and started the peer review process, and are just now finishing that up just for timeline and wrapping up as to where we are.
So as we were starting to figure out, what does an OER textbook look like? This was kind of the new process to Dr. DeYoung and I of how do we start, what do we do? So we started talking to some colleagues who have written them before and worked with different people on that. And one of the biggest things that we've experienced in this process is it really is the snowballing and the brainstorming, the presenting at conferences, getting ideas. I'll go into how Shannon was part of that, brainstorming how this became even bigger than what it started as. But that really was because of us talking to people and getting ideas from people. So we knew someone who had recently published an OER. We contacted her. She said, oh, hey, here's the publisher that I use. I loved them. See what they say about your project. So that's how we got in contact with the Milne Library. So it's the Milne Open Education, a resource library, which is part of SUNY Geneseo. We had to fill out a very, very in-depth application explaining a breakout of our textbook. They wanted a couple of example chapters. We actually had to redo the application twice because it wasn't in-depth enough for the first time around. But with that process, they accepted our project. And with that, we now got a whole nother team of reviewers and project managers and line editors, and they're going to put all Word documents into WordPress, and they're going to hold in a repository as well. So we have the wonderful support of a project management publishing team who has a grant to publish this work for free as an OER. Again, that came from us brainstorming and chatting the content up with other professors and people in our field. So that was a big part of this. Having that publisher has really been able to make our work as professional as it's going to become. Without that, it would have been us writing a wonderful Word document, but we would have known how to do a peer review process, how to do not only a peer review, but double peer review. We researched that one of the big reasons why instructors and professors don't use OERs is because they're not always peer reviewed. And we understand the importance of that. So we said, if we're going to create an OER specifically on the topic of social justice and diversity and inclusion, we want this to be free for inclusivity, so that any student who has to take a class in social justice could have access to this book and not have to pay the cost of a textbook. But also we wanted that diversity component of, we want people to be able to access this content regardless of the platforms. So we started brainstorming, how do we create content that is peer reviewed, that is trusted, that professors want to use because they can trust where the content is coming from, and how do we use it on a bigger scale? So this kind of brings us to the SUNY OER Impact Grant. So this is where Shannon Pritting came in specifically. He actually attended, we were doing part of the SUNY Empire State University. We do a fall academic conference. Bernie and I were just starting this. We were like had a halfway writing, figuring this out. We had the publisher already, but she was kind of there to support us. And Shannon Pritting came to our presentation, heard about it, caught us after and goes, "Hey, I like this. What can I do to be a part of this?" So he was a huge resource. First, was helping us find those current up-to-date resources that we were like, we want this to be a current event textbook, not just the basis, but real life situations. And then I will never forget the day he emailed us and said, "Hey, I found this SUNY OER grant. I think your project would be perfect for this." The idea of turning your textbook into these online components that anyone can quickly and easily embed in their online LMS system. And I said, "Shannon, this sounds amazing. This looks like it's due in 2 days. I've never written a grant proposal. Bernie hasn't either. We just don't know what to do. Unfortunately, I don't think this is going to work out for us." And Shannon goes, "If you want to do it, I'll do all that work for you." And we were like, "Oh my goodness." So he did. He did a gorgeous job on it. He busted it out. And we got this beautiful part of this wonderful SUNY OER Impact Grant. We were awarded over $18,000 specifically to turn the OER textbook into these online modulars. So that this was brainstormed by all of us together. But this is going to increase the inclusivity of the content to make it more accessible to professors, instructors, and students alike, to, again, keep that cost free, but make it able for anyone to access it.
All right, thanks, Cailyn. So one of the things that we, tried to do as we were looking at the project overall, so we're very fortunate to have the editing coordination by Allison Brown at Milne Open Textbooks and the support of SUNY Geneseo, with allowing Milne Open Textbooks to be supported. So these are some of the roles that we identified in looking at, how do you move from a textbook to an OER textbook plus courseware. So the faculty subject matter experts, Bernie and Cailyn, definitely important parts of this. And then we also wanted to make sure that we created courseware that was well designed, that was accessible, and then that it was seamless in the move from the textbook to the courseware. So we also had the assistance of Dr. Heather Bennett, who's one of our instructional designers. And SUNY Empire takes accessibility seriously. we're 98% online, and we don't require any documentation for accessibility support. So we like to do everything at the highest standards of accessibility. So that was, part of what Heather did is she both mapped learning objectives, and then she also looked at things like accessibility. And then I served as a project manager, maybe an editor in the courseware portion of it. And then, we have developed an embedded process where the librarians participate in course revisions, developments, reviews. And we found that that's extremely important in complementary skill sets and approaches to work with instructional designers who are very good at their specialization, making sure that it all flows well, that it's accessible, that the learning objectives are mapped, which is extremely important in adaptive courseware because everything is connected to learning objectives at the modular level, at the course level. But we found that librarians have more of a practice skill set in connecting and questioning or prompting for questions on subject matter expertise than perhaps instructional designers do. So we found that we work very well together as a team. So that was, it was great that Jennifer was involved with myself and with Heather Bennett, who made the courseware development of this successful. And then we also had some support from the Open Learning Initiative with working in their system, Taurus, as well. All right, next slide, Cailyn. So, we really wanted to be mindful of how this OER and this project fits within our overall OER structure at Empire. So I talked a lot about that rigorous course review process in our strategic plan at an institutional level. We have 100% of our courses will be reviewed within a 3-year period. So that's a really high level institutional commitment to the course review process. But for us, because we have so many faculty and administrators involved in course development and revision, it has been hard for us to adopt OER that is in essence the course. So courseware typically is OER equals the course. So we wanted to find a way where we could embed learning objects, which was exactly what we did when the SUNY OER services approach was more localized authoring and support for OER creation. We created a lot of learning objectives. So we also wanted to use the learning management system to the highest capabilities that we could. So this is a great test of like, how does that all fit together, bringing our past approach and then also, newer approaches to embedding content. And then also, there is an entire course that was developed through the textbook for the OER. Next slide, please. So the hardest part, I think, at the outset was just determining what was in the sidecar, and we focused a lot on, so these are the 3 parts of the textbook, and the sections that are in orange are what are included in the sidecar, which is the SUNY Ready to Adopt Catalogs term for learning objects that are not an entire course, but that can be pulled in to supplement a course. So we pulled 3 of the chapters, and I think the ones that are in blue, so chapters 7 through 13, could potentially be added at some later point because they're not necessarily focused only on human services, which is where part 3 is, and that is what directly aligns with the DEISJ focused human services course that Cailyn and Bernie teach, and that is, is what is going to be the textbook connected to the course. So that was a big portion of our initial planning, and we focused on the 6 because it is a lot of work to create multiple choice questions, adaptive learning activities, etc. All right, next slide. So we are now in a testing phase for the DEISJ modules in Taurus. So Jennifer will talk a little bit about that, but this is where we're planning or questions of where things will be available. So the textbook in entirety in the very near future will be available via Milne Open Textbooks. And then as we were talking to Allison and letting her know about what is going on with the development of the courseware, she brought up, that textbooks get adopted much more if there is supplemental materials, and we didn't want to assume that everyone had access to Taurus, because access to Taurus is part of the SUNY OLI Lumen partnership. And we wanted to make sure that whatever we were creating would be included in the Pressbooks version of the textbook as well. So that will be also available. And then we'll have the DEISJ modules that could be embedded into Brightspace or whatever your LMS is. And we're still determining whether that will go in the additional or community resources portion of the SUNY OER catalog or in the ready to adopt. We're not exactly sure. And then we're still thinking about how much more do we want to build beyond those 6 chapters. Is there potential for more of this content to be moved into courseware as well? Next slide. And I'll turn it over to Jennifer.
Great. So I'm here to talk about the practical aspects of moving everything into the sidecar. So in moving the content from the master document, which was in Word, to Taurus, we had to consider how content looks in Taurus, which is pretty different from how it looks in Word. You have the ability to embed videos, you have the ability to create all different kinds of question formats, different assessments. So in the textbook, the authors had built in a number of one-way questions to give students the opportunity to think critically about the content. And then we had to ask ourselves, how do we translate this into manageable assessments? So Taurus is an extremely adaptable platform, which is great, especially for social science content. I had never worked on it previously. This was my first time interacting with it. And it gives us a variety of ways to manage both discussion and encourage critical thinking on what to many students are very complex topics. Next slide. So how do we create meaningful assessments? So the textbook has a very discussion-oriented approach, which I think is excellent and also essential for a course on this topic. It's highly valuable, but for the smaller sidecar, we wanted to make sure that graded assessments and potentially very lengthy discussions were going to not end up creating a significant amount of work for the faculty and the students involved. Also in thinking about it, I think there is an inherent difficulty in transferring like end of chapter style reflection questions to adaptive courseware while maintaining learning objectives for students to critically engage in the topics. And I think that while it's difficult, it's an essential part of the process to make sure that this is rigorous and that students are engaging with the topic. Next slide. So how do we do that? I ended up taking a 2-prong approach. So questions that appear at the end of the chapter reviews, most of those ended up being converted to multiple choice questions. Multiple choice is not always the best approach. And also what you really had to think of was how to frame those questions, because a lot of times you can't just take a complicated and complex issue and dilute it into 4 to 5 multiple choice options. You have to be really thoughtful in your approach to that. So to do those questions, there were about 150 multiple choice questions that we ended up creating. So generative AI was used to assist with this conversion. So basically, we would run the original discussion questions through the Gen AI and say, hey, how would you create a multiple choice question for this? But then it was a careful process of checking and editing those questions to ensure that they were unbiased, that they were maintaining the proper level of nuance that was required, and that they maintained the rigor and the heart of the original discussion. So just a few examples, generative AI had a lot of problems with the idea of bias, which is sort of essential to this topic. Had a lot of difficulty when we were talking about inequality in the school system, in the way that Black and brown students are treated as opposed to their white peers. So there was a lot of checking and then rewording the questions and sort of tweaking them to try to get at what is the approach we actually want to take. And also making sure that the questions weren't simplified so as to become useless. So one of the examples I wish I had kept from my redlining document was the original MCQ, excuse me, it gave me was, is redlining good or bad? Yes or no? and even if you selected no, and then asked it like, well, what's your reasoning behind this? It would be like, well, redlining isn't always bad because property values are important to consider. So if you are using generative AI for any of these things, you really have to make sure that you're very carefully going through the questions and checking to make sure that the human component is still there. But it was also interesting because I think in a way the generative AI is a preview on the way maybe some students come in approaching these particular topics. So that was also slightly helpful to me as I formed questions. And then we had other topics that meant I said it again, MSQ, I don't know what my brain is doing, but that an MCQ format was not appropriate for some of these questions. So we wanted to keep them open-ended as much as humanly possible. Oh, that's bad. So yeah, that would therefore allow the students to continue thinking critically, but make sure that we're not overloading with assessment measures and also that we're not diluting them. Yeah, and in terms of lessons learned, just the last part of my bit, we are currently testing, so we're not reviewing for content. We have people from a diverse range of fields who are working through the course. They're going through those multiple choice questions. They're making sure everything is functioning properly so we can get this out there to people. And it was great to work on the project.
I want to offer Jennifer a time to show what they've been working on. So I'm going to stop my screen and you can share your screen and we can actually see what one of those chapters looks like.
Sure.
I think we have about 4 minutes. So if anyone has questions, they could maybe put them in the chat and then we can address them as soon as Jennifer gets done with the demo.
Yeah.
Right?
It should be a relatively quick demo. So there we go. So this is what it will look like to the students. This is the preview mode. This is the section on redlining. So you can see we have the original content from the textbook. And then we have an open-ended discussion question. So the way that we had to program it in Taurus was as a survey. So that would leave it so the students could write at length on the topic. And we also avoid having to program in gradable measures. So this was one of those questions that I didn't feel like we could dilute down into a multiple choice question. Just do you think Kenneth T. Jackson understood what he had found when he found the red line maps? Why or why not? Very difficult to put in a multiple choice question. But then we have a follow-up multiple choice that can be graded if the faculty member would want. So the way it works in Taurus, we can program in hints. So we have a hint for that, just to talk about like historical context, which is covered in the earlier chapters. So we're building on the previous work. And then as students click through, see, this is the live demo. So once you enter the hint function, it just skips, but let's see if we can. Back in. So if you didn't need the hint and you were just trying out the question, the other thing Taurus allows us to do is we can give contextualized incorrect answers to questions. So even if students are getting the question wrong, we can provide educational context for why that is incorrect. And then also it'll give the student an automatic check mark that shows that they are there. If it's a more nuanced question, we will also provide context for the correct answer that can just provide further information. But every single question in all of the sidecar modules has contextual clues for incorrect answers. And then you can see you can embed video, follow up with discussion questions. Again, like this one about redlining and Jim Crow legislation, very difficult to quantify into a multiple choice question. So it was good that Taurus offered us the flexibility to do both. And I will stop my screen.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Yep.
One of the wrap-up lessons learned that I kind of wanted to end this wonderful presentation on is really the importance of when you have an idea that it contains an OER component that's going to support the student body, don't be afraid to brainstorm and talk about it and bring your colleagues in. The whole point of an OER is to help create content that is accessible and strong for our student body. Don't keep those ideas to yourself. Get other people involved. People want to be involved. And that's how this, I mean, this could have been just Bernie and I writing a 20-page Word document resource with a bunch of links to articles. That's where this started. And now we're going to have a double peer-reviewed OER online e-textbook with online modulars because we decided to talk about it and get people's ideas and bring them in. People's ideas strengthen a project. They don't dilute what you're doing. So don't hesitate to talk about and bring other people in.
All right, looks like we're out of time. This was really great. If anyone has any questions, please put them into the chat and I'm sure they'll be happy to answer. Did you guys want to put your email addresses in the chat so that if folks want to reach out to you, they can?